When I was a kid, people used to call me Oreo. You know, black on the outside, white on the inside. Pretty clever, I'll give them that. But even though I played it cool and brushed it off as the joke that it always did linger in my brain. Oreo. Black on the outside, white on the inside. Now, for context, I grew up in Barbados, a predominantly black country, so of course I went to predominantly black schools, except for one primary school, but that's beside the point. I was always surrounded by people who looked like me, but I still always felt separate in a way. Now, it would be unfair of me to suggest that I didn't feel like I was part of my community because I definitely was. I didn't, fundamentally think that I was separate, but Oreo and other moments like that made me feel like on some level I was. Like, I didn't even fit into my own race. So that takes me into today's quote, which is from the one and only Childish Gambino, Mr. Donald Glover. He says, "We put stereotypes on ourselves. Everybody does that. But I think it's just a little harder for black kids to just be who they are." Stellar quote. Now, as you can imagine from the story I shared, I definitely resonate with this quote quite a bit. I definitely do. But I can't comment on what it's like for other races, whether it's harder for them or not. But since I was a black kid, I know what it's like to not match up to the stereotypes of my race. Now, the whole topic of racial identity is very complex. Your race, to some extent, does shape how others perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself. Not just because of your skin tone. It's more than that. It's more so because of the way society interprets your race. And that interpretation then shapes your life experiences, how you interact with your family, your friends, the way you speak, the music you listen to, the way you dress, the type of social events you go to, just so much. And of course, when you're a kid, all you want to do is fit in. Everyone knows that. That's like such a stereotype, such a cliche. Everybody wants to fit in as a kid. Almost everyone has experienced that longing to fit in and be like everyone else. If you haven't experienced that, kudos for you. I'm very happy for you in your childhood. But I think most people have experienced this. And also, when you're a person of color, specifically for myself as a black person, it goes beyond just wanting to fit in with the crowd. It can be a longing to fit in to your race. And of course, let me preface by saying this experience is not universal. I'm by no means suggesting that this is a universal experience. One, I'm not saying everyone or every black person has experienced this. Or two, I'm definitely not saying that every black person across the globe will have experienced it in the same way that I have. Because there are obviously stark cultural differences between black communities all over the world. So it's more than just fitting into your race, but it's also fitting into your culture and your ethnicity. But I focus today on the term fitting into your race because a lot of the issues and separateness that I experienced was steeped in racial stereotypes. So that's why I want to focus on the term fitting into your race instead of fitting into your ethnicity or something like that. Okay, so strictly for context, I am going to provide you with some of the stereotypes that I've been faced with. Some that are universally black stereotypes and others that I believe are a bit unique to Bajan or Caribbean culture. So the first one, listening to a lot of rap music, and most definitely not country music, folk music, or artists like Taylor Swift. That's seen as white. Listening to rap music is stereotypically black. And then, of course, the age-old sounding black. Boy, do I have a lot to say about this one. It can be in relation to, your tone and your inflections, just overall the way that you speak, or it can also be related to the terms and slang that you use, or even things like saying the N-word. And then it also transcends into specific cultures. For example, in Barbados, speaking dialect, or at least being able to code switch into dialect, is seen as a staple or a requirement of being a black Bajan. Being able to handle spicy foods, liking certain foods in general, the black foods that you should like, or, of course, as everybody knows, having a big booty. So, all of those things I have been faced with in terms of black stereotypes. And of course, there are so many more black stereotypes that exist, but I would say that these are the main ones that I have been faced with, the ones that I have experienced. So, of course, as you can tell, because you're literally listening to me, I don't sound stereotypically black, nor do I fully speak Bajan dialect. A lot of people don't even know or can tell that I'm from Barbados, despite having lived there my whole life. There's no real reason for this. I keep telling people this all the time. There's no real reason for that. It's just the way that I speak. And in some instances, I can code switch like ever so slightly, but I mostly always sound just like myself. When it comes to my music taste, I'm super diverse. I find myself listening to pop, R&B, folk, indie, disco, classical, and even though I wouldn't really consider myself a Swiftie, but I do like a few of her songs. But I'm not a Swiftie, I just do like a few of her songs. I can't really handle super spicy food. I can't. Me and my allergies don't mix with that. Everything in my face will just start running if I have super spicy foods. There's actually a few cultural dishes as well that are super popular that I'm just not a fan of. And in terms of body, I have a pretty slim figure.
So, needless to say, I don't really fit the stereotypical black mark.
And many of the other ones that I didn't even mention, I also don't really align with. So you can see where my label as Oreo would have come from. Now, taking it back to our quote for today, I just want to say I absolutely think that Donald Glover is right when he says that we place stereotypes on ourselves. The stereotypes that we are faced with are both placed upon us by others and reinforced by us. So, thereby, we are placing stereotypes on ourselves as well. We, of course, know that racial stereotypes originate from historical prejudice and systemic racism, but when those are perpetuated in the media and through cultural narratives that we as Black people and or people of color accept and internalize, then we begin to alienate anyone who doesn't fit the bill. You're expected to act a certain way, you're expected to have certain interests, speak a certain way, have certain appearance, wear certain things in order to just be validated as truly a member of your race. It's, I mean, think about it, it's honestly really ludicrous if you really sit down and just analyze the whole thing. For you to even feel like you're in the same racial group or are the same as the people that look like you, that have the same ethnicity as you, that have the same culture, the same skin tone as you have to meet these little stereotypes that we reinforce for ourselves. And if you don't, you just feel separate. And in some cases are actively alienated by different terms like the one I experienced, Oreo, or by different just individual experiences that people may have. Sometimes it's indirect experiences, sometimes it's just teasing, sometimes it's just actively alienating somebody or telling them that they're trying to be something that they're not. It's it's such a crazy and detrimental experience that I think a lot of Black kids and Black people in general tend to face within their own race. I remember when I first realized how ludicrous it was. I always felt it was off, but I remember when it truly sank in for me. I was around 17, and 17 was around the time when I started to truly take control of my own personal identity. And in that time, I ended up talking to someone who shared with me that they had felt the same way. It was a friend of mine at the time. And we were a bit alike in many ways. So it really wasn't surprising that we had similar experiences. But the fact that they told me that they felt restricted, how restricted they felt from expressing their personality in certain settings because they didn't feel like being called out on it or teased about the fact that they didn't act like everybody else or they didn't speak like everybody else or the fact that they just didn't fit the racial norms. They didn't feel like they fit in even though they looked exactly like those around them and shared the same culture. It's this idea that you're not acting Black enough or you're being too white or you're trying to be white or you're ashamed of being Black, when none of that is true. And it creates this perpetual feeling of inadequacy. And the danger with it, the danger with trying to fit into your race, is that it doesn't just separate you from what you assume you should be, but it also lowers your self-esteem and causes you to either shrink who you actually are, or in my opinion, worse, conform to the social stigmas that you're being faced with, those that pressure, that social pressure to act a certain way. to fit in with your race. And then you internalize and perpetuate those stereotypes onto other people. And then more people start to experience the same things that were experiencing before. It's a sick cycle. It's just this sick cycle. And it's even more distressing when you think about the fact that people of color already have to deal with systemic racism and exclusion and separateness from the rest of the world and all of the other systems of injustice. And for some people, you can't even seek solace in your own community. And of course, this separate feeling within your own community is nothing compared to the racial injustice and the systematic racism that people of color experience on a daily basis, and sometimes from other races as well. It's nothing compared to that. That's much worse. But the fact that it even exists is a problem. The fact that it even exists that we cannot feel comfortable to be fully ourselves within our own race. At least that's what I had experienced. And I know that there are some other people who have had some similar experiences to me. And I think this experience is even more so prominent for kids who may not have grown up in a predominantly Black environment. I think about kids who have grown up in white environments. Maybe you grew up in a rich white suburban town, and now you're going off to an international university and you're about to be around much more Black people than you were before, and you kind of feel a bit separate from your own race, which is, in that circumstance, is a bit more natural because there is a possibility that you weren't exposed to Black culture in the same way as you would have been if you had grown up around Black people all the time. It's a different experience. But the problem arises when the very Black people who are supposed to be your community are ostracizing you for not being like them or not fitting into stereotypes that have been internalized. And every time I think about this topic, I always go back to that perpetual feeling of inadequacy because I mean, I can think of so many different instances in which it has been expressed for myself. Like if I'm at a Black social event or something and they need somebody to go on the aux. And I'm not afraid of going on the aux because I'm afraid of how they'll judge my music taste. I'm afraid of going on the aux because they'll think that I'm too white. That's why. Not because, oh, I'm afraid that they might not like the music that I have, but because I'm afraid of how it will change their perception of my identity. And the times where I would say, I'm Black, I'm Bajan, and then other Black Bajans would be like, no, you're not. I mean, you technically are because like you were born here, you were raised here, you're Black, but you're not really Black Bajan. Like you're not really Bajan. You're not really Black because you speak like this, you act like this, you talk like that, you wear this, you listen to this. It's like, oof, I'm being stripped of my race socially. I'm being stripped of my ethnicity socially just because of my personality and because of the way that I speak, because of the things that I do, and because I don't fit the bill for what you're supposed to be when you look like this and come from here. So when I was thinking about doing this episode, I was like, okay, I know this issue exists. I am very aware this issue exists, but how do we fix this? How do we break this cycle? How do we make it easier for people to feel okay just being yourself? I think the first step has to be acknowledging the problem. You can't fix a problem unless you know that there's a problem. Same goes back to that same cliche. You can't, what is it? That you can't expect to be helped unless you acknowledge that you need help, that kind of thing. But in this sense is you can't fix the problem unless you acknowledge there's a problem. So acknowledging this issue and accepting that, hey, there is diversity in the Black experience. And maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need to fit into those Black stereotypes that are socially accepted in my community. Not everyone has to act, speak, or dress in a certain way in order to be validated as Black. And actively acknowledging that and speaking up when you can see it happening to other people and acknowledging, hey, maybe it's fine that she doesn't seem and act like the rest of us because she's still Black. Like it doesn't, yeah, she's different, but it doesn't make her any less black. It doesn't make her any less wherever you come from, you know? I think also making sure that you diversify the media that you're consuming as well, because the media has such a huge role to play in perpetuating stereotypes of all kinds, whether it's gender, whether it's sex, whether it's race, whatever. Like it just has such a huge role to play in the way that we shape society, in the way we see ourselves, in the way that we see others. So we definitely need to diversify the media that we're consuming so that we're not only seeing Black people as one homogenous group, like they're just one thing. There's only one type of Black person, and that goes for everybody, not just Black people alone. Obviously, of course, every other race, so that we don't continue to have these racial stigmas against racial groups. But I think also Black people need to do it as well, so that you're not internalizing only one idea of how it is or how it should be to be Black. We should be seeing the Black experience as varied and holding endless experiences and personalities. The way I personally dealt with breaking the cycle and making it easier for me to feel like it's okay to be myself and still feel validated in my race and ethnicity is I, honestly, I just truly got tired of the bullshit and just said, I really don't care if you call me an Oreo. I don't care if you perceive me as quote unquote trying to be white. I, because so much of myself did not or does not fit into the stereotypical Black person that it just became so hard to even try to conform. So I just had to get over it. Like I just had to sit down with myself and say, I am not trying to be anything except happy and content with myself. So I will continue to be myself and know within myself that I am Black. And there's nothing that can change that. There's nobody that's going to invalidate the fact that I am Black, the fact that I do come from Barbados, the fact that I am Bajan, the fact that I am who I am. And of course, the jokes will still come. And even I admit that some of them actually are funny, and some of them I do laugh at and make jokes at myself about how I struggle to say certain Bajan dialect terms. And it is funny. But the difference now is that I don't let them affect me anymore because I know who I am. And I'm fine with who I am. And I'm fine with the fact that I don't meet half of the stereotypes that many other people have internalized and shaped themselves around. And some people do naturally fit into stereotypes. There's no problem with if you fit into a non negative stereotype, whether it's, of course, if you fit into the stereotype of Black people being violent, I would not encourage that. But other stereotypes that I would have mentioned, if you do naturally fit into them, then fine. Just be comfortable with who you are because you get to choose your own identity. It does not need to be dictated by anyone else but you. And it certainly does not need to be dictated by stupid racial stereotypes that continue to be perpetuated throughout our societies. And I refuse to be an example of that perpetuation by conforming to an identity that I don't feel I identify with. For me, my identity is determined by my character, by my actions, my authenticity, just overall who I know myself to be. And I really deeply encourage you and anybody else listening to remind yourself of this and remind yourself that you are the one that dictates your entire identity. Of course, your identity is going to be shaped by your societal experience, but you can only let it be shaped by that to a certain extent. You cannot let it change who you know yourself to be. And you can't let yourself get clouded by whatever it is you think you should be, by whatever it is other people are pressuring you to be. So, quite frankly, I don't really care what anyone else has to call me. I don't really give a shit anymore. I haven't given a shit for like years now. And if you've experienced similar or had any challenges with fitting in or being comfortable with your identity, please feel free to share with me. I'm always willing to listen to other people's stories. It's one of my most favorite things in life to meet people and hear their stories and share their experiences and understand other people's point of view. Even if you disagree with me on something that I might say in these episodes, please feel free to give me a shout because I love expanding my viewpoints. And you can do so on the Notes and Quotes socials, which, as I always say, are on Instagram and TikTok at the Notes and Quotes Pod, on YouTube at the Notes and Quotes Podcast. You can reach more of me on my Instagram at Naomi A. Cambridge. And if you did enjoy this episode, please do leave a rating. Please leave a review. Follow the podcast if you want to see more. And check out our website so that you can find ways to support the podcast so that we can keep doing this. Because podcasting ain't easy, but I know it seems easy, but it's not easy. So please, please do support. And with that, that's I think all I have for today, guys. This was fun. I loved talking about this. I hope that I get to talk about more topics like this with you. And I will see you next week. Bye.